When you dare to share, you break the silence. When you dare to share, you speak your truth. When you dare to share, you use the full strength of your voice. When you dare to share, it brings opportunity to own your story. So tell it, be heard, and at the same time, your sharing is someone else's learning, inspiration, motivation, empowerment, and hope. There's always an element to each of our stories that remains a secret. For some, we feel it's a dirty little secret. Dare to share your untold story exposes these secrets in a welcoming and positive way. I encourage each of you out there to dare yourself to share what is yours to tell. When we dare, it is the courage to do something really important. Let this be a vow to each and every single one of us that we take risk, we brave, confront, and face what is, while inspiring and empowering all communities. So let's break that silence and tap into mental beauty. This is Salima Jadavji, your podcast host, a practicing clinical social worker, and your mental wellness connoisseur. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast, episode number 32, A Marriage and Divorce Both Behind Closed Doors. To all my fellow listeners, before we get started, I'm just dropping in a note to give you a heads up that this podcast might be emotionally triggering for you. We do invite guests onto the show who share openly about extremely difficult life moments with exposure and impact of what the struggles have been like. The intensity of each episode could have a variable impact on your emotional and mental well-being based on your own personal story. If at any point the topic becomes uncomfortable or upsetting to you in any way, please do not pressure yourself to listen. Instead, be kind to yourself, do some self-care, and perhaps give another episode a try. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our lovely and daring guest, Cindy Stiebard. Cindy is the driven and compassionate leader and CEO behind Divorce Redefined, a Vancouver-based separation and divorce coaching practice. Divorce can be a messy, stressful, and particularly raw experience, and few truly understand the process, know their options, or how to cope with and manage this major life transition most effectively. After going through her own divorce, Cindy felt inspired to help others successfully navigate this difficult time in their lives. As a certified separation, divorce, career, and transition coach, Cindy created her unique practice to help people on an international level through every stage of their divorce and beyond to redefining themselves in their new chapter of life. The goal of Cindy's vision of creating Divorce Redefined is to lead the charge of changing the experience of divorce. Living by the mantra, when we know better, we do better, she is on a mission to eradicate the stigma around divorce by redefining the entire experience. Hi, Cindy. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast.
Hi, Salima. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, Cindy, I'm so excited that you're here as well. You know, it's going to be a great conversation. I'm looking forward to sort of diving right into the conversation that we're going to have today. I want to express how thankful I am that you bring with you this openness and willingness and lots of courage to be able to share what you have gone through, to share your experience and from a place of wisdom, and really for your support in taking a stance with me to help break barriers of mental stigma. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's really important, and it's important to have these conversations and really share our own stories, because I think the more we do that, the more we realize that we aren't alone. And a lot of these issues are faced together if we just have these conversations around it.
Yeah, the normalizing of the conversations, being able to have open conversations, that's what this podcast is about. It's about bringing forward those untold stories, bringing forward the things we typically won't talk about or don't talk about, that real, true, deep place of vulnerability. And when people go through those types of strife and struggles, whether it's about a mental health related issue or something else, no matter what that story is, there's always an impact to mental health in some way. And that's the part that doesn't get spoken about. So that's why I guess the purpose of this platform is really a way to serve to break those barriers of mental stigma that have been conditioned in our society. So I'm really hoping that our conversation, your presence and mine together, we can just continue to encourage people to share and tell what they really can talk about and not have
Mhm.
reservations for expressing. So, to that note, I'm bringing forward a trend. It's called the
Mhm.
mental beauty rethink. What are your thoughts about it?
I love that, and I think I really love the point you made about we need to bring awareness to mental health, and when we go through big transitions in our lives, whether it's anything from having children to our children going off to school to getting a divorce or to becoming, empty nesters or any real massive shift in our worlds can cause a lot of strain on our mental health. And it's so important to take care of that and really focus on knowing what to do when that happens and surrounding yourself with the proper support to be able to help you transition in a mentally healthy way. So I love that concept and I think that's so powerful.
Yes, I'm so glad that you love it and that you also find it powerful. Yeah, because we're really just trying to really break it down. And it's, invitational. I thought of it as something invitational, just sort of giving people an opportunity to see it from a different angle, to position themselves differently, and to embrace it the way you would physical health, whether it's positive experience or a not so positive experience. But all parts of it are beautiful. Cindy, are you set for our daring questions for today?
You bet. I always
All right.
open and ready.
Oh my goodness. Well, then I can't wait to start. So then, Cindy, give us the newspaper headline of how you would title your untold story. What would it say?
I think the newspaper headline I would say would be redefining herself through divorce. So I named my practice called Divorce Redefined because I really, being through the process myself, having gone through divorce and realizing that it is almost a long process. It's in some ways it's not over because my ex-husband and I have children together, but it was really an opportunity to rise above what was such a massive traumatic event in my life, and it really provided opportunity to redefine who I was through this process, really redefine my life values, redefine myself as a mother and as a person in this life with purpose. And I truly feel that if we can start to shift our mindset around looking at divorce as a failure and at the end of your life, right? And almost like this event that stops life from moving forward, instead looking at as how is this, what is this trying to teach us, how can we learn and grow from this because this is happening for a reason, and what can we take to redefine ourselves from this experience.
And so you've really taken the time to just change that experience of divorce for yourself. And a part of it is how you came into yourself, too, right?
I think it is, yes, and it's also almost like coming back to yourself. I think that
Yes.
as you grow up, you really have these values and that you have yourself. But then when you couple with someone and you get married, sometimes
Mhm.
those values are, put on the back burner. Sometimes
Mhm.
for our spouse or significant other, we tend to want to, create this peaceful place where it's calm and maybe there aren't competing values. But
Mhm.
instead of really bringing those values to the table, sometimes we ignore them.
Well, you know what? I'm now I'm even that much more eager and I think warmed up to hearing more about what your untold story is all about. Tell me, what are the untold parts of your story? Tell us what is part of that story, who's involved, what was involved, when it was, where it was.
Yeah, gosh, there's a lot of untold pieces of the story. And when you look at divorce, there's so many things that really come into play. I really firmly believe that marriages don't break, they erode over time. And it's all those little moments of disconnection over the years that can really cause marriage breakdown and some distance between you. I didn't have a really solid sense of myself and self-esteem going into my relationship initially. I had grown up as an eldest child of a middle class family, which was great. My dad wasn't around a lot though, and the relationship with him was quite a struggle. He was very authoritarian, and it was kind of the my way or the highway approach with him. And I struggled with an eating disorder, probably starting at 15. I was emotionally kind of distant, I think, from my family because being the eldest child and having a dad not around a lot, I never wanted to be the burden on my family that um, with four other siblings, there was a lot for my mother to take care of. So I left home right at 18. A lot of the reasons was because of the relationship between my parents was very toxic, and I had told them at a young age that if they didn't get divorced, then I was leaving at 18. And so they decided that they weren't getting divorced then, and so I left. And it was about 3 years later or so then they finally did. But during that time, it really sent me on this path of trying to be on my own. And I felt that my connections with, my father was not great. So I think because of my attachment style, it was a bit of this anxious, avoidant attachment. It really was difficult for me to create healthy relationships with other men. So when I met my ex-husband, it almost replaced that father figure. He was very similar to my dad in that way. And I didn't see it at the time. I only really discovered this after, like, doing therapy after my divorce, realizing, "Oh, that attachment style was what I was I was used to." So that's what I was looking for almost. It was comfortable, that anxious avoidance. And so growing through this new relationship, it was really always like he was the leader. I followed what he wanted to do. He was sort of like in charge, and my needs and my wants were secondary. And thinking that I had to keep that quiet and just follow along, I thought in my head that's what, a good girlfriend does, right? You just sort of let your boyfriend or husband lead the way. And as it progressed that way, I think my self-esteem never grew, but I struggled with feeling heard and feeling seen for who I was in that way. Mm, and we didn't communicate very well because of it, because I don't think I was really able to communicate my needs very clearly, and felt that they were always met with a wall of resistance and defensiveness, when I did anyway. So you tend to then just to avoid those difficult conversations, right? And they really go undiscovered or unevaluated almost between a couple, when you would just ignore things that you should probably talk about, but neither of you have the skills to talk about them. So, over the years and over my marriage, I felt that I felt secondary, in this relationship. And my eating disorder was something that I kept really quiet behind closed doors. It was still there, and it would pop up during times when I felt stressed, came up again when I had kids, because your body changes so much, and your mental health changes so much when everything's a little bit out of balance and you're trying to do everything on your own. And I really invested in my role as a mother. I had left my job as I was a teacher. It was a family decision for us to leave my career so that I could be a home mom. And at the time, I was nothing would make me happier than that. But I think as women, when we tend to sacrifice all of what we feel brings us purpose to raise our children. I'm not saying that that is not an incredibly purposeful and important job, but when we just invest entirely as that role as a mother and a wife, pieces of us get left behind. And my independence, became less and less as my dependence on him became more and more. Now I was no longer earning any financial, or like being able to financially contribute to the family. I didn't really have much of a career to speak about, so those conversations really didn't exist. It was all revolved around the kids and just providing for the home. Over time, that can be really a lonely experience, I think, for a lot of women, a lot of mothers. We're doing the best we can, but there's so much on our plate, and there's so much that we strive for and we desire. And I struggled with that over time. I loved it. And then once my kids were getting older, I felt like I was coming out of my cave. They were going to preschool, and I wanted to kind of come back into myself as a person. And during that time, I had discovered that my husband had an affair. In fact, he had had a couple, but I had just discovered one at the time. And I was completely shell shocked, as any woman would be. But I think a lot of women too, because so much was on the line for me then. Wasn't working. I was being fully supported. I had two small kids.
So can I ask, like, when you found out about the affairs of the infidelity, like, how long was it into the marriage when you found that out?
The first one was we was before we had actually gotten married, and then the second one was, I think my kids were young, like, I wanna say, like, 5 and 3, and I was so enmeshed in that,
Mhm.
bringing up little kids role, that I
Mhm.
didn't want to deal with it. I didn't want to deal with what that meant. And I just felt also, I mean, maybe this was me, but I think as women, you think, okay, I'm going to be that great wife. I'm going to be that wife that every man wants, and I'm just going to let this go, and we're going to get over it, and I'm just going to,
Mhm.
persevere and plow
Right.
through like nothing affects me, right? I've got my
Right.
armor on. Looking back, that was the biggest mistake that I could have done, is not deal with it appropriately at the time. Like, I think we
Mhm.
could have grown so much if we actually invested in what that meant, why it happened, how it could better us. But without dealing with your issues, you tend to then start to become this closed door. Walls go up, you don't investigate, and trust starts to diminish. So over time, my trust for him slowly deteriorated, as well as, resentment builds up and disrespect, because soon it was I would be asking for all of those things, like date nights and let's spend time together, because clearly, if you step out of our marriage, clearly we need that. We must need some time for connection. And it was always met with a wall of resistance from him. Like, I didn't have enough time, or, I was too difficult to plan for, or, we've got small kids. And so how do we do that? It was always an excuse. Having looked it back at that now, it was because maybe, there wasn't that investment in the marriage, and there wasn't that wanting to grow and change and address these issues, perhaps. I had asked for marriage counseling several times, even as Christmas gifts and birthday gifts. What do you want for Christmas? What do you want for birthday? I'm like, I want that marriage counseling, right? But I was never given my gift. Um, and I think it's so important for couples to actually do counseling and therapy before they get to that place, because I think it's so important to just create those open lines of communication. And was a real strain on me as I approached my 40s, because I thought, like, really, like, is this as good as it gets? Am I just this mom and this wife, and I'm never going to have that love or that ideal relationship that I want? And I would speak about this to my ex-husband, and he would always tell me that, I'm such an idealist, and what I'm looking for doesn't exist. And we have a great marriage and you have a great life, and I'm able to provide for you. You don't have to work. You should be grateful for all of this, right? So of course you feel like, oh yeah, I know I'm grateful. I know I should be grateful. I am grateful. So I guess I have no right to say I'm unhappy.
So I wanted to ask, like you mentioned a lot about like how, there were all these disconnected moments and, the relationship had its wounds. But did you notice anything about his personality in terms of investment in the relationship? Like I know that, you would ask for Christmas gifts or birthday gifts, like, what do you want?
Mm.
Yes, I want marriage counseling. Did you notice any subtleties in his behavior or any sort of like any tendencies that would lead you to believe that there was something in his personality that was less than okay for you? Like, or do you feel like it was just a overall deterioration over time?
When it comes to his personality, yes, there was a lot of, which I discovered now after doing a lot more inner work on what that means, but there was a
Mhm.
lot of a passive aggressiveness in our behavior.
Mhm.
There was a lot of that almost covert narcissism, in a way that it was
Right.
which I didn't even know existed at the time. I didn't even know what narcissist meant. I don't think.
When you say covert narcissism, you mean like the gaslighting, the subtleties, the unseen
Mhm.
oppression, that type of thing?
Yes, and when it's covert, there's a couple of different, like, subcategories of narcissism, and this is one where it goes really well undetected from everyone on the outside, including yourself as a spouse, because it's not that grandiose, "I'm so amazing," and there's a lot of that, like, outward, manipulation and, obvious verbal abuse, right? Not the games being played, but there's just that underlying, like, that sense of guilt, that defensiveness, that gaslighting, that mental manipulation, but really in a passive aggressive way that makes you feel like, "Am I imagining this?"
Yeah, do you have an
Um,
example of what one of those manipulations would have been like for
Well,
you?
I think similarly, I would say examples of, like, the gaslighting behavior, where you'd bring something up in terms of what you're questioning or what you're concerned about, but it would be turned around on you, like, "Why are you concerned about that? Really, it's not a big deal. You need to stop worrying about that. You're making yourself crazy. Maybe you should go see a therapist." That type of
Mhm.
thing. And being
Right,
like, "I
okay.
know that you're struggling with this. I know you've had a hard upbringing. Maybe it's, you need to go get yourself some help." But really, it
Mhm.
wasn't for me about any of that at the time. It was the fact that we weren't connecting. I think those types of things, and even coming down to, when we had small kids, I felt overwhelmed because he wouldn't come home from work early enough to
Mhm.
help me while with the kids at bath time, at
Mhm.
dinner time. And next thing you know, I was putting them to bed and he'd be walking through the door. And it was hard on me. My kids were 18 months old. And so instead of like
Right.
rising to the occasion and be like, okay, I'll come home and help, well, I'll just hire you some help then.
Right.
It was almost like, "You're such a helpless woman. I'll hire you help."
Yeah,
Friendly,
he's
he's
so kind.
very,
He's
like,
attentive to your needs,
easygoing.
right? Like,
Yeah, there's not, like, there's no abuse in that way, but there would be a lot of that almost, kind of oppressiveness, right? There's this little bit of control where I'd bring something up, like maybe something, let's say, really bothered me emotionally. Let's even use this COVID, for example, and I would question, let's say, questioning the vaccine. Is it safe? And what are we finding? And I'm a questioner. I really like to investigate things. Like, I'm no way am I one side or the other, but I really like to well, let's talk about this. And my talking about issues would trigger in him that I'm crazy. He would say, "You're crazy," or, what kind of conspiracy theories are you listening to? you know, it's ridiculous, you need to be a better mother in this, blah, blah, blah. But it would sort of be like, oh, I'm just trying to be curious. Like, I'm just wanting to have conversations here. Like, this is not a reflection of the fact that I'm one way or the other. And so those types of things would be shut down. It was either his way or we're not doing it at all. Ways to really avoid questions. When you're asking your partner tough questions and they literally dismiss them entirely, like ignore them like they were never even said. A lot of that type of thing. Um, and it's really hard to see that from the outside. So most people, by the time I got down the line to having getting a divorce myself, most people had no idea what was really going on.
would you say there was a lot of surprise from the outside?
A lot, yes, definitely socially, because I also didn't talk about my struggles. I feel like
Right.
it was personal, no one
You
really
kept them
understood, and
behind
I would
closed
just
doors.
be.
Yeah.
Yes, and I would look like this ungrateful, woman complaining about her perfect life. I
Right.
think a
Yeah.
lot of women feel that way. Like, how dare I
Mhm.
say anything that I'm unhappy when what could I
Mhm.
possibly be unhappy about?
So what would you say was this the what would you say is the straw that broke the camel's back then?
For me, I think it was the overtime disconnection and the
Mhm.
real need for being seen and heard and appreciated. I
Mhm.
felt that I wasn't being desired anymore by my husband. Like, I
Mhm.
wasn't being seen like him. He would never ask me a question of how my day was, that I literally could have had a whole second life going on, and he would never
Mhm.
know because there's not
Right.
one question that was ever asked about me. What ended up happening was I felt this resentment build up about how dare you treat me this way? I know there's more out there for me. So I then decided to have an affair myself. I think to validate my need for feeling needed and wanted again. And I was 40 now and feeling like, is this as good as it gets? Like, is my life truly over? Am I an undesirable woman and just a mother? And I thought also that that experience might springboard him into opening his eyes up and being like, oh, wait a second, like, we do need to work on this. And this is not what I want. And, maybe opened his eyes to seeing me. It didn't.
Did you feel invisible in this process?
I did. Yeah, I really did, because there was no interest in, my days, and no interest in who I was. And I would ask him that. I would complain about that. And he would say, well, what do you want me to ask you? What you did with the kids today? Or like how your spin class was? I'm like, no. It was very belittling almost. And there was no interest. So I totally felt invisible. And I especially started to feel now that resentment come up from his past affairs, because I felt that, not having dealt with that, I felt lesser. Like, I felt less of a person. I felt unworthy of that love and attention that I wasn't getting. So I stepped outside my marriage to see if I could find it, to see if it was still there for me. And it was. And although that affair was just like a test, really, for my own personal, self esteem, it really worked to wake me up and feel. I almost felt empowered, like, wow, I actually do have more to offer. I actually am, still desirable. Like, this isn't the way that a marriage you're supposed to feel in a marriage.
And so then what's the first step when you guys when it was sort of decided to take that path of divorce? What was your first step?
So I decided to finally, this is probably now 5 years later, after that affair, and with, I think, the continued feeling of being empty in my marriage, I ended up leaving my marriage for another person, a partner that who I'm still with right now, almost 4 years later. And I think because, a woman, even if, regardless of an affair, I think they contemplate leaving their marriages for a number of years before they actually get there. And I think for me, that was the turning point when nothing changed. I had to then figure out what I was going to do. And it took me 5 years to really get there and decide to take a risk. I wasn't being heard. I wasn't being seen. There was not going to be marriage counseling happen. Nothing was changing. How can I wake this up in a way that is going to be obvious that I'm serious? And by then, I had already, met someone on the side and fell in love and thought, well, I guess this is my exit. It's not the right exit. I don't recommend doing that for anyone, because you want to be able to end your marriage first. And I think only because that happened, I had the courage.
It was a path that was unique to you, and you were really doing the best that you could with what you knew at the time and how you knew what to do at the time, right? And I know you're saying you don't necessarily recommend that particular path to someone else, but at that time, that was the best that you could do. That you really were trying to
Yeah.
be as true to yourself as possible. From where I sit right now, when I hear you share about that, that's kind of what comes up for me.
Yeah, and I believe I was, and I think that everyone in that situation is really doing the best they can. And when
Hmm.
you don't know any better, you can't do any better. Had
Right.
I gone back, yes, I would have done things a little bit differently. Had I still
Hmm.
left, I totally would have still left. I wouldn't have done it in the same way, but I
Right.
definitely would have still left my marriage. And
Right.
I I would have been a bit more clear, I think, or used it as a chance to have those difficult conversations. But when you feel so trapped in your marriage, you don't really know if it's going to matter. And I work with a lot of clients all the time who are desperate to leave, but they don't want to be that person. They almost want to wait for the other side
Right.
to do something, to give them that opportunity.
Yeah, I find that for women, when I speak to women in therapy for issues just like this, they talk about this feeling of not wanting to betray their partner or their husband, or how that guilt and shame that comes up with feeling like that they're going to be the ones doing the betrayal. But one of the things that we work through is learning that the less you choose yourself, the more you are betraying yourself. That's a
Mm,
key message that I usually work with individuals on, and especially when a woman starts to recognize that, it changes their whole like persona. Then they're like, oh, this is where I have control. Like, it's okay to choose me. I have the ability to take back control here.
definitely. I think,
Yeah.
yeah, that's definitely true. It's the self-betrayal that we go through for so long. And there are,
Yes.
besides just the actual having an adulterous type of betrayal, there are
Right.
so many little
Yes.
betrayals that happen in a
Yes.
relationship all the time,
Right.
including that
Hmm.
betrayal to ourselves for sure.
So yeah. So then, when you initiated the divorce, and what was that process like? Like, did it get a little messy? Did you both kind of recognize, like, okay, this is what we need to do? Like, was there some sort of agreement there, or what happened?
It definitely got messy from that point because it it got scary. I think the moment you're in that emotional overload and you immediately it's terrifying, and so the first thing people do to protect themselves is they rush out and get a lawyer. So that's what I was told, "Go get a lawyer because you're gonna need it." And so you do, and out of just complete, horrifying terror, like, "My life is falling apart, I guess I need to get a lawyer," which is actually what you don't wanna do, especially from that place of feeling emotional overwhelm. You wanna try
Mhm.
to start to put other things in place, because the moment you both go lawyering up because you're emotionally devastated, that's when that traditional adversarial battle ensues, and it doesn't need to happen, and in fact, it makes everything that much worse. So for us, that's what instigated, that's what ensued, and it was a very terrifying series of events that began. We did, however, jump straight into counseling, like as a family, to deal with separation counseling as well as dealing with the kids. And so that I think was a positive part of what of the way that we were handling it, because we both needed to feel seen and heard. This was almost an awakening moment for him. He wanted the marriage to work now all of a sudden. It was now important for him to fix it. For me, I think I grieved it already. It'd been 5 years of this built up of resentment and feeling trapped and falling out of love, that I wasn't prepared to now work on it. I had I think I had gotten to that place where there was just too much that couldn't be brought back for me.
Right. Yeah. It was too
So,
much damage, too much had happened. It was going to be hard for you to restore that.
yeah, and knowing how resistant he was to change for so long, and knowing his
Hmm.
personality the way that it was, I
Right.
really didn't believe
Could you
he
trust it,
he
or
was
that
gonna.
was the whole issue, is that you couldn't trust that it was actually going to happen if you did try a bit more?
I think that was it too, yeah, and I didn't believe that he had it in him to make the changes that I needed. And I
Hmm.
almost feel sometimes when you can't change a person, right? You can't change anyone. They have to wanna change themselves, but when they don't feel that they're responsible for how it worked. I mean, he never saw his role in the breakdown of our marriage, or in my affair, where I definitely see, affairs happen because of the disconnection between two people. And I recognize that my my role in that process for him. But then when you're dealing with the other side and having, your spouse believe that there's nothing that he could have done differently in the marriage, and my affairs were definitely not his fault, not that they're anyone's fault, um, but how he contributed, that's when I thought, no, if there's zero accountability here, and that I'm the blame, shame, have to wear the scarlet letter for the rest of my life, I don't know. I don't believe that we're going to ever be able to get past it. So that's sort of where we lied on that, and we cohabitated for the next year and a half with the kids, so that they could transition. And also, it was a difficult time for me. He had cut me off
Of course.
financially, and being that woman in a situation where you didn't have any of your own finances, I was trapped and I was not able to go anywhere on my
Right.
own anyways. So it felt you feel helpless. And I think in a situation like that, and I don't want to sound risk of sounding stereotypical, but when the power position like that comes into play, and let's say a man who's the breadwinner and the financial controller of a family feels hurt and betrayed,
Hmm.
it's this sense of creating a situation where where your spouse, the one who's caused hurt and pain, they can't escape from it. They have to rely on you. You now can control, um,
Hmm.
putting them through this hardship for what they've caused
Hmm.
you for the next
Yeah,
while.
like a payback,
And
like a subtle payback.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, like,
Hmm.
I'm going to make this as hard as possible for you to leave this marriage,
Right.
right? And the hardest part too, I think, and I think the society just naturally still has a really big double standard when it comes to men and women and how affairs happen. If a man leaves his wife for another woman, it seems normal. It's because his wife must have been crazy. Clearly, they are unhappy, and good for him for finding a new woman, likely, oftentimes younger, and moved on. Whereas if a woman does it, it's a complete social and societal suicide. I had to the battles that you face as a woman doing that, you're looked at as, you know, um, the town slut, or a whore, or you're a terrible mother. How could you do this? Or the crazy person.
All the stigmas and assumptions and all of that's how the gossip starts, right? And
Yeah, and your world starts crumbling, and you realize that all of the social connections you thought you had, or the friends that you thought you had, are no longer your friends, because as a woman now you're threatening. As a single woman who's left her marriage for another man, now you're a big threat. And you're bringing up a lot of issues for other women who may be stuck in the same situation but do not want to face it because they're too afraid.
Cindy, when people come to see me for therapy, individuals are typically in one of three places. Some people are getting started with where they're at in their journey of that particular part of their story, and they don't even know how to begin or what's the first step. Some people are in the middle, they're just right in the thick of a major life issue, and need support to kind of go through that process. And some people are looking back, gaining closure, or looking to reflect and get some introspection so that they can move forward in their life. What part of the journey would you say that you're in? Would you say that you're, I don't make any assumptions or judgments, that's why I ask. Would you say that you're getting started, in the middle, or looking back?
I think I'm a combination of both the middle and looking back because, we're still only, just coming up 4 years in this
Mhm.
situation and still raising kids together and still dealing with that. You're still kind of in it,
Mhm.
right? There's still arguments that are to be had, discussions, disagreements. There's still the ways that your parent now are differently. Um,
Mhm.
and so it's hard to actually get out of it, I think. I'm at managing my
Mhm.
conversations though and my emotions way better than it did at the beginning, of course. But
Sure.
our relationship now is very, very business,
Mhm.
and it's
Mhm.
completely shifted. So in that way, I'm still in it, and mental health wise, I think I'm
Mhm.
always going to be in it. I think this is always a journey of how can I learn from every single little experience that I'm going through so that I can help others. And then I'm looking back on it because I'm looking back on the way that our process unfolded and knowing that there can be such a different way. But because there was no support for either of us to help us through making those better choices, that's how I'm learning from that experience and have done my training to be able to be that support person that people need when they're in that time of complete emotional overwhelm and need, so that the trajectory of your divorce can really be changed and supported in a much better and a much healthier way.
And so, you just mentioned about, like, in terms of mental health, mental health wise, you might always be in it. And that's part of your way of reflecting and staying connected with yourself and knowing how to be better so that you can also support others in a better and more helpful way. I'm curious about how your untold story has affected your own mental health in terms of the pre divorce, like how you were affected, and maybe even going through the divorce. Like, was there any specific things that came up for you in terms of how your mental health was impacted?
Yes, I think pre-divorce was when I was definitely at my lowest. When I felt I was empty and alone, and when my eating disorder was in the closet, being held uh, a secret from the world and as my own little secret coping mechanism. Um, when you feel alone and afraid, I was turning more to alcohol and socializing with friends just to really numb my pain and drown it out. And it's really easy to disregard your problems when you surround yourself constantly with other people, right? So I was doing that a lot. And I feel through my divorce, it was a huge hit on my mental health in terms of it could have taken me down, right? The social suicide that I went through and the friendships that were lost and the stigma that was attached to what I had done and the relationship that was destroyed between my ex and all of the hardships that was caused from that, I think if I knew inside that I was not a very confident person, it could have destroyed me. But knowing that this is, I need to be strong here. I know what's good for me. I know that I could let this take me down a hole and get stuck and have it ruin my life. But I need to make sure that I stay focused on caring for myself, doing as much of the work on myself as I can, making this different because this is my chance. So
Right.
there was a lot of times I had to sit with myself and really listen to that inner voice and be like, "No, we're gonna get through this. Yes, it's a shitty time, but
Hmm.
let's look at this like a challenge. How
Hmm.
can we move through this and learn and grow and then be able to connect with other people who are going through exactly the same thing?" Because during it all, you feel so alone because divorce is so stigmatized. Nobody wants to talk about it. I mean, nobody
Right.
wants to say the word. You always hear "Oh, we don't say the D word here," right? It's like
Right.
nobody wants to discuss.
Of course.
And so you feel that emptiness and that alone. And I think now through my divorce, I love just love therapy. I just love self-improvement. I love self-development. I feel that we are in this age right now where there's so much out there to consume and read, and there's so many amazing, coaches and therapists who we can turn to and take this on like we would take care of our body physically, right? We eat nutritious food, we do exercise, well, we know the positive benefits of that. So how can you then nourish your mind and your soul the same way?
Exactly. And so, you bring up a beautiful point about how you've been able to immerse in sort of all the learning and personal growth and, empowering yourself from within. So, I'm curious about what your key messages are to the listeners of our show.
Key messages.
Yeah.
Yes, I would say 100% number one, get yourself some really guided support if you're going through divorce. And even if you're only just contemplating it, a lot of the work that I do with people is when they are only just thinking about how do I get divorced and how do I do this in the best way possible? Because that is key. Being able to set yourself up with information and education, it really only empowers you more in the process. Let's erase this whole myth that, oh my gosh, if I reach out to a divorce coach, that means I'm getting a divorce. When in fact, it's not. And me, as being a divorce coach, in no way am I pro divorce. I'm pro healthy relationships, healthy communication, development, happiness.
Mm.
Secondly, would be if you do decide to get divorced,
Mm-hmm.
don't rush and grab a lawyer first of
Mm-hmm.
all. I think
Mm-hmm.
that that is a big mistake that people make because they don't know what else to do. So they don't know that there are other ways that you can get support
Mm-hmm.
before having to lawyer up. And the choices that you make at the very beginning of divorce are really going to determine your entire outcome. So the way I work with people really is to have them focus on the end game. What is it that you want this to look like 5, 10 years from now? What kind of relationship do you envision having with your ex, with your kids, with your extended family members, with your ex's family members? What do you want out of this? How do you want to be seen through all of this? And then let's take that vision and let's work backwards from there because that will determine the choices that we make at the start.
Those are some really good messages. And so, Cindy, I'm curious as well about what would have been game changing for you in terms of inspiration. So, something that would have been close to you, inspiration that was close to you that reflects your untold story. So, is there like a quote or a book or something that speaks to you?
I read all of Esther Perel's books because she's a psychologist that really focuses on why affairs and infidelity happens in marriages and
Mm-hmm.
why we need to rethink the way that we look at this and
Mm-hmm.
what is the root cause of it. What are we really looking for? I needed to make sense of it all, like why it happened to me, why I did it,
Mm-hmm.
what
Mm-hmm.
was the science behind all of it. So
Right.
she really, if anyone doesn't know who she is, Esther Perel has
Mm-hmm.
this very strong perspective, and it's very unique and different.
Yeah.
And I would highly recommend her teachings as well.
Awesome. Amazing. So, what would be a cause or an organization that has been impactful to you in your journey that you want to give a shout out to?
My family has been hugely supported from the very beginning. They cast no judgment and were there for me, solid, steadfast, not changing. And I they really did a good job of playing Switzerland as well. Like I didn't want this to impede the relationship that they were going to have with my ex-husband. He's still the father of my kids. Like I still consider it family. So it was up to him whether or not he wanted to continue those relationships. And I was totally okay with it. Didn't
Mm-hmm.
forbid my family from not being a part of, his life because it had nothing to do with them. And
Right.
because they were so open and non-judgmental, they just were able to accept that, still accept him. They were able to accept my new partner in my life, realizing that, this happens for a reason. And, it happened, but we need to just keep on moving through it. So my family was hugely instrumental. I don't have an official organization, I would say per se, um, just yet. Yeah, I'm happy to have one and look for one, but they're sort of where I'm at. with that.
Okay, well, you know what? Let's give a shout out to Divorce Redefined because come on, like you've personally built, nurtured, and grown all of this. It's obviously it's self-inspired. It's something that you grew and developed for yourself, and now you do it for others. So I say let's give a shout out directly to Divorce Redefined, and we'll see what other organizations come along the way, right? Thank you for sharing all of that, and of course, shout outs to your family too. It sounds like that was an unwavering amount of support and something that must have been a very helpful pillar of strength for you. So, how can people connect with you if they would like to? What are your handles?
So I'm on Instagram. It's at Divorce Redefined,
Mm-hmm.
and you can message me there. Anyone who would like to do that. I'm also on TikTok
Okay.
at Redefine Divorce. Cindy Stibbard, divorce coach.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on LinkedIn as my full name, Cindy Stibbard, and also Facebook. My email is cindystibbardcoaching@gmail.com if anyone wants to reach out and even ask for more information. I always offer a free discovery call for anyone just looking for information about how my services might be able to help.
Perfect. Well, thank you
Mhm.
for sharing all those details. We'll make sure that it's on the show notes page. And so you will be able to be reachable in all those platforms. So we'll have that up for you. Guess what, Cindy?
What?
You have just dared yourself to share. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. That was a big share too. I hope your listeners are okay with that. There was a lot going on there for me, and
There's a
I'm
lot
take.
going on there, but my
Mhm.
goodness, I, I've just got to say, like, I am so thankful for your willingness to be part of this podcast and to share with such, gentle humility. Some of the most difficult aspects of your life journey is something that you've just unveiled today, and you have incredible perspective and insight. It's just you've you've braved to unveil today. And so it's been such a deep and daring and raw conversation that we just had and we just unpacked, and you showing up with so much vulnerability and authenticity, that was quite the dare on you. So you
Thank
really
you.
have redefined what you have endured, and this story has so much to give the listeners, and it's just admirable to have been part of uncovering your untold story. So I cannot thank you enough.
Thank you so much for providing such a safe space to do that. I think it's really important to share our individual stories and
Yeah.
really be truthful. I own my story from the mistakes
Mhm.
that I made through to where I am now. And I think that if we own our story um, and grow from it, that is the best that we can possibly do.
I 100% agree. And once again, Cindy, thank you for being a part of Dare to Share Your Untold Story and helping to be a voice in breaking down the barriers of mental stigma. To all of our listeners, if you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and you want to be part of breaking down barriers of mental stigma, I invite you to go wherever you are listening to the episode and hit subscribe. Leave us a comment or a review of the episode and maybe how you relate to it. To learn more about what we offer, visit www.daretoheal.co. And if you are feeling ready and brave to share, please submit your story by visiting www.daretoshare.co. Thanks for joining in.